I'm Andy Orm at O'Reilly, and I'm talking today to Michael Italia, who is the lead application scientist at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And I don't really understand the job title, so I'm just going to ask you to tell us a bit about the Children's Hospital and what you're doing there.
Sure. So Children's Hospital of Philadelphia actually is the oldest children's hospital in the country, and we're split up into both clinical care and research. And I am squarely on the research side of things, and we're organized around centers of emphasis. So I'm in the Center for Biomedical Informatics, and what we do is similar, appears to be similar on the outside to what a traditional IT organization is, but we're not really a traditional IT organization. And so our group is full of scientists, programmers, MDs, and at least one person who's all three. And so, we are interested in data and using data for translational research. So in supporting the research mission of the hospital and using software and data technologies to do that.
Of course, you'll be speaking at the Open Source Convention this summer in Portland.
That's right.
Yeah. And this research does have immediate practical applications, too, in feeding kids, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It does. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about this work is that, most of the research is very closely linked to clinical care. And so many of the people we work with are clinician researchers, and so they come to meetings with us to talk about software requirements, and many times they're coming from having just seen patients, and so it's a very immediate sort of impact that you can have. And really, the researchers, they want to get their hands on clinical data and use it for research purposes, and that's really where we come in and assist them.
Now, I'll say that the reason I asked you to talk to me today, and the reason I'm doing this video, is to try to get other hospitals interested in doing the kind of research you're doing, which will improve the way they treat the patients. That's what we hope. So we'll be going into a fair amount of detail about the tools you're using and the data and what you have done to get the doctors to cooperate and so forth. But first, I would ask, I know you talk about this in other forums. You go around the country talking to other hospitals. And what is the reaction of your audience there?
So I think, researchers really want to get their hands on clinical data, and I think everybody understands the need to use data in their work because it improves patient care, and so there's real interest in this. And many hospitals, as you say, are doing this. And I think, really, there's tremendous potential here. And I think one of the challenges is that, many hospitals are adopting electronic health records now. And so they know that they're capturing this data, but how do they make use of it? How do they get data out? And so, people are very interested in hearing about that. And it's difficult because the electronic health record is not something that exists for the purposes of research. We all like to use it for research purposes, but the reality is it is primarily for capturing the interactions between a doctor and a patient and for communicating those interactions to other people involved in the patient's care. And so when you go and you take that information out of that context, you can have some difficulty in really making use of it, for research purposes, where you tend to want things that are very clean, very well organized, very tidy. And that's just not the case. Hospitals are chaotic. Things are happening, rapidly. People have to capture information quickly. They're not always thinking about, nor should they be thinking about how this is going to be used for research purposes. So I think many people recognize these challenges, and by no means do we have all the answers. But I think we're working on some strategies to help with this.
Meaningful use is asking the doctors and the Recovery Act that mandates meaningful use. The hospitals are supposed to be collecting more of that data and sharing it with the government, I understand.
Yeah, that's correct, and I think it's an important distinction. So many of the things that are required for meaningful use are often outcomes measures and things like that. And traditionally, our group is not really as involved with those. So hospitals typically have analytics units that are looking at those sorts of things. So these are groups that traditionally were involved with planning, in terms of looking at patient flow through different departments and the like. What we're interested in is actually much deeper. We're actually interested in digging into very specific data in individual interactions and with individual specialties, and really doing sort of very early research. Many times people know they want to do research, but they don't necessarily even know what questions they're going to ask. And so we sort of work with them to kind of understand what their goals are for their research and what they're trying to accomplish. So in many cases, the meaningful use things are a little more well-defined than some of the things that we tackle.
But you're not just doing grand sweeps and trying to collect all kinds of stuff in case it's useful. You're targeting what you're looking for.
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, we were talking about one interesting project with the audiology department, and you had persuaded them to capture data in a format that's useful for you, and perhaps you could talk about what you did with them and what kind of data you're getting.
Sure. I can't take total credit for this. So the audiology department very early on realized that they wanted to do a research project over the long term, and got several grants to do preliminary studies to investigate the feasibility. And really what they wanted to do was capture as much information about patients seen in audiology at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and to try to understand the genetic basis for hearing impairment. And so for people who aren't really familiar, I'll just give a little background here. So hearing impairment particularly in children is primarily a genetic disease. There's some cases where it's not, but primarily you're not exposed to enough environmental factors for it to be something that is environmental. And so we know that genes play a major role in hearing impairment, and there are many known genes already that have been identified. But there's a great deal more that we want to know. And so the audiology department decided early in their build out of their electronic health record component in the hospital's system that they wanted to discreetly capture data. And so they were very, very methodical about making sure that numerical data was captured properly. There's traces from equipment that get serialized into floating point pairs that we can pull out of the database. There's just a wealth of data, very, very specific data relating to hearing testing that we can pull out and put into a relational form and then mine. And so we, in some sense, they were set up to do this. When we arrived more recently, and they said that they wanted to push this forward, and now we're looking to turn this into a more national consortium-based effort. So they really did things right. I mean, they really thought about this, and it's challenging because if you want to capture data for research purposes, you still have to do clinical care, and so you can't give someone a form with 500 drop-down lists that they have to wade through in the clinic while they're meeting with the patient. I mean, it's just not practical, and so all of these things have to be balanced against clinical care because that's paramount. I mean, patients, come first, and the treatment of an individual patient is the primary, goal here, and so it's in some sense a difficult balancing act because many times those of us who work with data, we like things very, very neat and tidy, and often that imposes things on individuals who need to get their job done. And so audiology did quite a good job with it, and so we're reaping the rewards of that now. We sort of have a two-pronged strategy for dealing with data in the Research Institute. And so on one hand, we try to use data from the health record as much as we possibly can. But then we're also using software that was developed at Vanderbilt called REDCap, which is basically an electronic data capture system for clinical research. And so in cases where a group hasn't been able to build out the electronic health record, we can use REDCap at the beginning of a study and help define the data diction, things like that, so that we can begin capturing data. And I see these things as complementary. So in many cases, if someone from a specialty were to sit down and design their EHR build, they might not know what fields they want to capture discretely. And so by being able to use REDCap, it's very easy to use. Clinicians can sit down and quickly build out their data dictionaries and quickly get forms in place. So we can use that in a research setting, and that can then inform as they go and enhance their their EHR builds with more discrete data for research purposes, they can use the learnings from REDCap. So we've seen a lot of success with that. It's very, very popular internally, and there's lots of studies using it. So those two approaches can really work well together.
Seems that REDCap creates, as you said, a data dictionary, but it's also a way of organizing knowledge, so it's sort of ontological too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can you can certainly start to look across studies and start to see different parallels in terms of what data people are capturing and how they're capturing it, and we can use the data directly for research purposes. Obviously, that's the whole point. So we can quickly export data out. We can load it into statistics packages like R and SAS and things like that, and start mining it. So yeah, it's really quite flexible.
And you could produce, I suppose, a standard output format. It could be JSON or something if you wanted to share the data.
Yeah. There's a number of export options. Pretty much all the major export options you could imagine. And we, it's a sort of open source project. You basically become a member of the consortium, and then all consortium members have access to the software and things like that. So we actually got a pretty good working relationship with Vanderbilt, and we've looked at extending it in various ways for different projects internally. We did some work early on to make it work on mobile devices, for example, to ease data capture. So we really tried to, as much as possible, leverage that.
And do you actually provide native apps on mobile devices, or is it web-based?
No, it's web-based. I mean, we are not a very large group, so we have to be very careful what kinds of things we take on. And certainly, when you get into mobile device development, particularly in something like that where you're going to be capturing data at research, you have one shot, sometimes with a patient to capture all the information. So you have to have high quality standards. And it's very difficult at the current state of mobile devices to make sure that native apps run reliably and well across every platform out there. And so we've really just focused on the web for as far as REDCap's concerned. We've done some mobile device development just to have our hands in it, but primarily for REDCap we've been pretty conservative on that.
I'd like to turn now to a web interface that you designed. You're trying to bring in subject matter experts who are not programmers.
That's right. So, sure. So on the audiology project, so what we did when we started meeting with Audiology, they wanted to make all this research data they'd been capturing in the electronic health record available to researchers at other institutions, outside CHOP, inside CHOP as well, but primarily, outside of CHOP. And so, how best to do that?
Hospital.
Yes, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Yeah, I slip into that frequently. The primary way that we did that is. We quickly realized that the primary users of this application were not going to be, sort of geeks like us. They were going to be clinicians, researchers, people who generally, may not have had much experience working with relational databases and similar kinds of applications. Maybe they had some experience with Excel, maybe they built an Access database if you're lucky, but we wanted something that was very simple, very easy to use. The project sponsors in Audiology were adamant that this had to be just dead simple to use because they wanted adoption to be high. And so what we've built is an HTML5 based web application that looks a lot like some sort of business intelligence tools that you might be familiar with. It's similar, to any number of things that are out there commercially, but very much geared toward biomedical data. And so we give people very rich interactive interfaces with graphs of the data in the database so they can see counts of things right up front, and they have a very visual query builder that they go through to build their queries, and so they can ask very specific questions about the data without really having to know underlying database structure, without having to know anything about tables and joins and all of that. It's all hidden and abstracted away. And so, they can quickly mine the data. There's lots of links in there. They can quickly pull up radiology images, genomic data. Everything's very, very tightly integrated. So really they can zero in on the problem and really explore hypotheses. It's when you have a big database of information, you often don't know what you have, and so researchers don't even know if they can ask a question because they don't know if there's enough patients in the database to really follow up on the research. So this gives them rapid iterative abilities, and so we built it. The technologies we used, we wanted to, as much as possible, capitalize on existing projects. We really don't like to reinvent the wheel if we don't have to. And so we've built it primarily on the Django web framework. We're making heavy use of Django's object relational models to do all the automated queries. We've done a lot of custom stuff with the ORM to make it really work seamlessly for end users. We've got a whole metadata layer on this that allows us to, at runtime, basically make certain fields that might be hidden available. So we've done that. We're using a lot of JavaScript on the front end. If you name it as a JavaScript library, we're probably using it. jQuery, all the standard ones. So we really wanted it to be a modern, rich application. And actually, this is a challenge for us because in healthcare, and as in a lot of industries, people move slowly in terms of browser, things like that, and so we had to make sort of some tough calls about browser support because there's lots of people still on browsers that really can't render HTML5, but we're looking forward. We're kind of trying to skate where the puck's going to be on this because we're investing significant effort in it. So we've had to sort of make some sacrifices there in terms of what browsers will support. But overall, it's turned out pretty well, and we're tentatively calling it. We're calling this the Harvest Stack. So it's going to be an open source package. We're working on open sourcing it right now, mainly getting documentation ready. We've got all the code in GitHub already, but we're trying to get it documented so other people can use it. So stay tuned for that. But that's going to be a major project that we're going to be releasing. And we hope to sort of start to build a consortium around that and get other centers using it as well. We think it has broad applicability. We built a framework, during the audiology project, the AuGenDB project, but we quickly realized that we were going to want to use this on lots of other projects. And so we really put a lot of time into thinking about how we could make it modular and abstract out the various components. Things are all built off RESTful web services and things like that. So if you need a different client interface, you could put a different client interface on. If you want to swap out the relational database because we're using the ORM, you can use whatever relational database you want as long as it's supported by Django. I mean, we really tried to make this a modular software stack that people can use, sort of a framework on top of a framework, if you want to think about it that way.
It sounds very powerful. How many, I know it's sort of an early stage, it's the first project, but how many patient samples are in there and how many people are accessing it?
So we've got, I'm not sure the exact count. We've got over 30,000 patients, I believe, right now, currently, with our last data refresh. And as I'm not the administrator of this, I don't have a full user count, but we've got a number of users from around the world using it. I think we've got, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 or 30 researchers currently using it, outside of CHOP. So it's small, it's early stages. We've only had it public in the last year or so. We're still trying to build that user base, but I think as we move forward in incorporating data from other institutions and we broaden the number of individuals who are in the system, I think we'll start to pick up a lot more researchers that way as well.
And tell me, what's your most exciting project right now?
So right now, I'm actually really excited to be working on this. Late last year, there was an opportunity to apply for a grant from the National Human Genome Research Institute, which is part of the NIH, National Institute of Health. And this was an interesting grant because in contrast to a lot of genomic research grants, this one sort of wasn't interested in new gene discovery or identification of unusual genetic phenomenon. It really sort of treated all that as secondary, and it said, assume that it's a few years down the line and we're routinely sequencing individuals' genomes clinically. What does that look like? And they basically want us to have an incentive to adopt genome sequencing technology early to look at strategies for some of the thorny issues involved in genome sequencing. And so I think one of the things that maybe people aren't aware of is just how close we are to being able to sequence your whole genome as part of a clinical visit. So in fact, the cost has just been just dropping at an incredible rate over the last 10 years. And so it's really, it's here, it's almost here. And, the figure keeps changing, but in terms of costs,
there seem to be different levels. For instance, 23andMe can give you a genetic test for a couple $100, but I figure that's not as good as what you get for $1,000.
Right. So, and I mean, what we're talking about here is actual genome sequencing. So what places like 23andMe have been doing traditionally, they're looking at markers. So they're looking at a broad sample of the population at very specific points in the genome, but they're not looking at the entire genome or even entire coding regions of the genome. So your genome is sort of split up into regions that code for specific genes, and then sort of filler material that does something we just don't know always what it does. And so they're looking at this much more narrow sample. So there are many things that aren't detected in those kinds of tests. It's a known limit. There are known limitations there. They're certainly good. They're good for a broad survey. They're good for identifying certain known things up front, but they're not as good for the level of detail you want. And so currently, genomic sequencing, full sequence data is about $2,000, I think, between $1,000 and $2,000 in cost, and it's going to continue to come down. And so this raises a bunch of issues. There's huge ethical issues about this. If you think about making this a routine test, I mean, it's not like other tests. It's not like a blood test or getting a hearing test or something like that. I mean, it's something that's with you. It's applicable, for the rest of your life. It tells you information not just about yourself, but about your parents. There is the potential there to find out things that you might not otherwise have found out, and so there's just huge ethical concerns. In fact, we're part of this grant is to look at those ethical concerns, and we're partnering with the University of Pennsylvania's Bioethics Center to investigate those. But it's coming, and it's coming soon, and so we're looking at that, and so there's huge technical challenges with this. One is that clinical labs need to be able to rapidly turn around results, and one of the issues with this is that when you sequence someone's DNA at the level that we're talking about, you get massive amounts of information in terms of what they call variants, which are the differences from that individual to some reference genome, and so you have to pick through these variants and understand what they mean, and many of them may mean nothing, and you're talking about potentially tens of thousands of them for a given individual. You need multiple data sources to really evaluate these things. Data storage issues. I mean, you're talking about 12 gigs or more per person, ballpark of data. Not all of that's being analyzed. Some of that gets thrown away. It's redundant, and so on and so forth. But still, and basically the tools that we have for looking at this data, for analyzing it, are very crude compared to where they need to be. I mean, if you're talking about a hospital the size of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and you're really saying that every new patient that comes in potentially is going to be getting a genetic screen, the tools have to advance very rapidly. And I think actually this is a very rare case where software can really have an outsized impact on patient care, because using genomic data to inform physicians about what is potentially going on with their patient is has the potential to head off some very serious conditions that otherwise you wouldn't know about. So the example that I always like to use is sudden cardiac arrest. So this is a very rare condition in the population that has known genetic causes, but we don't know all of them, but we know a number of them. And so if you could test everyone, you would be able to identify individuals who have a propensity for sudden cardiac death, and you could modify their behavior. You could say, look, you need to be very careful about strenuous exercise, you need to maintain hydration, you need to go for regular EKGs, so on and so forth. That has a massive impact on patient care. I mean, if you're one of those individuals, it can save your life.
Yeah, we
So
hear about some young athlete who just collapsed on the field, for instance.
right,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. So really, and how are we going to do that? We're only going to be able to do that if we have good software that can rapidly identify these things, pick out the signal from the noise, so to speak, and flag that information and make it available to the clinicians when they need it. I mean, this is another part of this that's so exciting, is that we're not just looking at the raw data as it comes out. We're also being asked to investigate how do we integrate this information into the electronic health record. So, the average pediatrician in the United States really has not had much training in genetics. If you're talking about a primary care pediatrician, I mean, my wife is one, and we taught this regularly. It's very difficult for them to interpret genomic information, particularly as it's currently presented. They get a list of genes. They've never heard of these genes. They don't know the specific details. And so we need to move away from that, and we need to move toward actionable information. So letting a pediatrician know, for example, that when a kid comes in who's had a fainting spell, who also has a particular gene variant, that they might actually be dealing with a case of where someone might be susceptible to sudden cardiac arrest, and presenting that information, front and center in a way that's that gets their attention, but is also at the same time not annoying. We're not constantly alerting them to all these potential conditions that may or may not be there. So we're sort of looking at this from end to end, from the very beginning, with patients and what they want to have returned to them, all the way up through to the clinicians and how we integrate this in the health record. So it's a really fascinating study. I'm really excited to be working on it, and I'll actually be talking about this at great length at OSCON this summer. So I'm really excited. So if anyone's headed out there who's watching, please come to the talk. I think you'll be able to learn a lot more about this there.
Well, with that, I'll wrap up our conversation today, although there's a lot of great things I'd love to talk to you about more. Maybe we can go
Sure.
sometime. It's been fun to talk, to see some O'Reilly books on the shelf behind you, including, I think, one that I edited. And I'll look forward to talking to you at OSCON.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.